All right, good afternoon. Welcome. See, people are starting to join us for today. I will get us started with our intro as folks are joining the room, since I know we have a lot of conversation to cover today. But welcome to our Include NYC live presentation, which is our disability insights, practicing innovation and resilience in daily life. So I am Kylie, and I will be your Zoom support for today. And we have Sherelle Cruikshank and Kathleen Downs, who are going to be providing our information for today. Just a little bit about Include NYC. For more than 4 decades, we have been helping young people with disabilities, their families, and professionals. We offer a workshop, a helpline, and a variety of resources on our website, and I will be adding both our Include NYC helpline in English and Spanish for you all in the chat. Just a couple notes for today. We do have Spanish interpretation available. So to listen in Spanish, you can click interpretation in your Zoom window and then the language you'd like to hear, and just make sure that you mute the original language so that you can hear your language fully and properly. We are also in webinar mode, so when you enter this room, your sound and video are automatically off. But if you do have any thoughts or technical issues, we have our chat box available as well as our Q&A box for questions. Just note we might not be able to answer every question for today, but we will provide follow-up information in the chat for you all as needed. So I'll pass it over to Sherelle and Kathleen, who will be leading our discussion.
Thank you, Kylie. I'm Sherelle Cruikshank, the very proud Executive Director of Include NYC. And Kylie shared some information about the organization. But what I will add is that as of last year, as a citywide nonprofit organization, we assisted more than 15,000 people and reached more than 400,000 New Yorkers through communications and community outreach, all free of charge to our participants. And we envision a world where there is love, equity, and access for all young people with disabilities. So today, I am very excited to kick off a series of conversations to explore various aspects of wellness and how people with disabilities succeed in the face of challenges. Individuals with disabilities face physical, systemic, and social barriers as they navigate a world that was not made for them. Yet many people with disabilities have developed unique strengths through experiences that foster a creative problem-solving mind, being innovative, and certainly showing resilience. Please join our conversation today with Kathleen Downs, a disability justice activist who was born with cerebral palsy on embracing one's abilities and recognizing unique strengths that exist beyond limitations and enrich individuals and our society. Hello, Kathleen. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming to share your story and really inspire people that they can accomplish whatever they want. So, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Kathleen Downs. I am almost 33 years old. As was mentioned, I was born with quadriplegic cerebral palsy, as well as a rare spinal condition called Tarlov cyst disease that causes me chronic neuropathic pain. So, um, basically, functionally, that looks like I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I need assistance with pretty much all activities of daily living, and um, I am non-ambulatory other than small amounts of exercise at this point. By training, I am a social worker who specialized in leadership and social change. I have a particular interest in policy, especially Medicaid and long-term care. Um, I'm also very interested in Social Security benefits policy. I'm a board certified patient advocate, and a two-time graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I was the Include NYC communications intern in 2017. So I've been pretty lucky to have a lot of cool experiences in different parts of the disability community. Um, and I live in the suburbs in Nassau County, just outside of Queens.
Wow, you've done a lot. So there's much to unpack. I can't wait to talk about this. So why don't we start with when did you decide that you wanted to be a licensed master's level social worker? What was that journey like for you?
So I graduated with my master's degree from the University of Illinois in 2018. Um, Before that, I completed my undergrad at the same school, but it took a while for me to settle on social work. Um, I always knew that I wanted to try to make some changes to the service systems that exist for people with disabilities because I have seen them from the inside and how they work and how they do not work and how many enormous gaps we still have in the safety nets that support our disabled populations. Particularly, I knew that I wanted to be a representative for adults with disabilities because in most systems, people over the age of 18 kind of get pushed to the side. Fortunately, there's been a lot of medical and social advances that have allowed us to live much longer lives, but the service systems have not really caught up. And as a result, what we can offer to adults with disabilities is much less robust. And I don't think many people realize how many intense systemic issues exist for adults with disabilities. There's, you know, there's somewhat forced poverty related to qualifying for care programs. There's a real lack of quality recreational programs for adults with disabilities. We have a real caregiver shortage. Um, we have a real accessible housing shortage. And I knew that those issues are some things that I wanted to use my lived experience to try to address. Um, of course, none of these issues are things that can be solved in a short period of time, but it's always my hope that people become aware of these issues and they don't wait for disability to personally affect them to realize why these issues are important. Unfortunately, I had a bad experience with social work when I was in undergrad. I had a very ableist instructor at the time tell me when I asked for her help with finding a book on campus. It was my very first week of school. I was only 18 years old, and there's multiple libraries across this huge campus. And this instructor, who was a social worker herself, um, without me even mentioning my disabilities, said something along the lines of, I know that people with disabilities are used to getting things served to them on a silver platter, but that's not how it is here. Needless to say, that kind of turned me off of the whole department for several years, and that's why I wound up doing my undergrad in community health and disability studies. But luckily, I found my way back to social work for grad school, and again, fortunately, that one instructor was a bad apple, but I realized that part of me always knew I wanted to be in social work and that I wasn't gonna let that one negative experience turn me away from the whole discipline because it's personalities like that that keep people with really important lived experience out of the field.
That's unfortunate, but it is wonderful that you found your way in spite of that obstacle. We do need people with lived experiences in the field doing the work because they can be empathetic to those that they're advocating for. So, in spite of all of that, how did you learn to share your opinions and be heard and have people treat you the way you wanted to be treated? And I guess a little bit about how it was when you were younger and how it is now.
Okay. Um, well, I'd say some of my earliest exposure to advocacy would be around when I started junior high, in the fall of 2006. I went to a 7 to 12 school, so my junior high and high school were all the same building, so it was kind of one big contiguous experience. And I was um I was one of the only visibly disabled students that my district had ever had. Um in my junior high and high school, I was one of only three students with a wheelchair, and within that group, I was the only one that needed a significant amount of physical care. Um, and I definitely had the most complex support needs, so um, my presence was still somewhat radical at that time. Um, and I saw early on that the bus service that the students with disabilities were getting was not the same as what the non-disabled students were getting, even though my school was about 5 minutes from my house. My accessible bus would consistently either not show up or be super duper late, and they would act like it was not really a big deal or that it didn't matter if I was late or if I missed certain classes. And I caught on very early that, something like this would cause an uproar if it happened to non-disabled people. So one of my first campaigns really was going back and forth with the bus depot about why we were getting such poor service and just being a thorn in their side about trying to fix it. Um, and I'm very fortunate that I have very supportive parents, but again, early on, we all realized that because people tend to infantilize disabled people, that if I ever wanted to be taken seriously, I would have to speak up for myself. And my parents were very intentional about having the things I was concerned about come directly from me because they didn't want people speaking to me through them or disregarding my opinion. Even today, as an adult, a lot of times if people see one of my parents or a caregiver present, they will ignore what I have to say and try to speak to me through a non-disabled person. So it's very important to me to be spoken to directly. Um, Another thing that was really important to me in school in my early advocacy days, I had some really bad experiences with one-to-one caregivers, either them not being trained well or not showing up at all, or just really stifling me socially because it's really not easy to have an adult following you around and breathing down your neck, it makes other young people not want to talk to you. So I really pushed the school district for an alternative to the one-to-one aid model. Um, and eventually, when I was in 10th grade, we came to an agreement with the school that the school nurse would help me use the bathroom. And then, other than that, I was able to um, go off on my own, and we kind of worked out a little system with the other kids in my class. They would help me open doors and move my desk for me, and I was able to carry my books by putting them in the extra space in my chair, but also the other kids around me um, were generally good about helping me pick up books and things like that. And I think it was good for all of us to see that you don't need special training to pick up a pencil for a person in a wheelchair. You don't need special training to hold a door for a person in a wheelchair. There are some, you know, needs that need to be addressed by a trained person, but in many other ways, we're just people. And when you know, when we drop this idea of like, oh, everything needs to be a specialized person because you have these special needs, quote, quote, it when all that falls away, people realize that a lot of my needs are quite similar or the same to what they need, and that they're quite capable of meeting those needs for me. Um, so that was definitely one of my private my most prized accomplishments, because not having a one-to-one for those few years really helped me develop my own sense of identity and um have an easier time socially. I'm very grateful to the nurse that made that possible for me, and I hope that in the future other school districts can see really how developmentally detrimental it is to have an unnecessary um m- one-to-one um, when you have more intermittent needs. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my introduction to advocacy. In elementary school, I was also the only visibly disabled student and only wheelchair user they had ever had. But when you're that small, you haven't really come into your own as far as fighting your own battles yet. So even though my participation in the local elementary school was fairly revolutionary at the time, I don't think I really came into myself as an advocate until junior high.
That's still early. And kudos to your parents for setting you on this advocacy path and making sure that your voice was the voice that was being heard. A lot of parents don't do that. And unfortunately, as you said, professionals sometimes forget that they are actually dealing with a person that has their own thoughts and that they should be asked. So I love the fact that you started advocacy so early, and that is a huge accomplishment to the one-to-one support that you were getting. So kudos for that. So you mentioned about getting having friends and how sometimes those supports prevent people from wanting to help or even just be friends. How do you go about building a community of people with disabilities in mainstream spaces versus disability specific spaces? Like, is there a difference in your opinion? And how do you go about navigating that?
So I would say definitely one of the most challenging parts of having my disability and needing a huge amount of physical care is it can be very isolating and it can turn people away from you socially, sometimes because unfortunately other young people may not know a lot about um how to be there for you, or they may not just want to be inconvenienced by the extra things that you need. So I've definitely dealt with a lot of isolation, but I've been very fortunate that I had the opportunity to connect with a lot of young people with similar disabilities. We're lucky to live in an area that has a lot of great programs for young people with physical disabilities. I went to a wonderful summer camp for my whole childhood for children and young adults with physical disabilities. And I also did a dance program for people with disabilities where I now volunteer. I did adaptive equestrian. I did adaptive swimming. So getting to build that community where you're not alone and you have other people that are having these very similar experiences was really formative for me. Um, and also, learning to be proud and comfortable of my about my disability and to remove the shame from having a disability. I think it's very important to have positive things and positive experiences that come as a result of your disability so that not everything associated with disability is negative or isolating or loss, because just like anything in life, disability is a multi-dimensional experience. It's not all joy, but it's also not all suffering. And um, having these disability-specific spaces where my disability could just be part of who I am and be sort of standard fare really helped me develop a positive self-image. As far as, connecting with people without disabilities, it is certainly challenging, particularly when you're young. But over time, you realize that the people worth spending time with are going to accept you for who you are. Um, I don't see my disability as something that needs to be overcome. It's a natural part of who I am. It's not all of who I am, but it's a very formative piece of who I am. So if you don't see my disability, then you don't see me, and anyone who is really gonna be my friend or be close to me in any way is going to appreciate my disability as part of my whole self. Sometimes non-disabled people are not going to be able to fully understand exactly what I'm going through. But that's okay as long as they are willing to listen and learn and be open to being beside me and um trying to support in the ways that they can, um because there's still space to connect with each other even if you're not having the exact same challenges at every moment.
Absolutely. Great point. So you are a blogger. Can you tell us about what made you decide to have a blog, what kind of topics you cover on your blog, and what you call your blog?
Sure. So I do have a blog. I started it in 2013. It's called The Squeaky Wheelchair. I got the idea for two reasons. First being the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, which is often the case in advocacy. And then secondly, because the power wheelchair that I have and pretty much every power wheelchair that I've ever had has been squeaky in a literal way. Um, I started blogging and I started writing in general about my disability because it was another really important channel for exploring what disability meant to me and opening up to people about that side of myself. Um, I I wanted to make disability real for people because unfortunately there are many who either don't know someone with a disability personally or they don't realize that they know someone with a disability personally. So the only exposure they're getting is maybe through media images that tend to be a little bit more stereotyped, or they show maybe one type of disability or one take on disability. Um, and having one single narrative about a whole group of people is never good. So I wanted to contribute my story and show people what disability means for me, but also remind them that disability is a huge and extremely diverse group of people and that disability looks different for everybody. That I can't, and no single person can, represent people with disabilities on the whole because all of our experiences are so different. But that is why it is so crucial to have as many disabled stories as possible out there so we don't fall into the trap of thinking that there's just one story that represents all of us. Um, Also, people are very quick to tell people with disabilities who they should be, what they should do, how they should live. And I wanted my own platform to tell people who I think I am and how I feel about my own life and my own disability. Something that has always really resonated with me. So former Vice President Kamala Harris, she always said that her mother would tell her, don't let anyone else tell you who you are. You tell them who you are. And I felt the same about my writing and getting my thoughts out there, that I want the chance to tell people who I am and not have them just force upon me whatever they think they already know about a person in a wheelchair.
That is such a great point and so inspiring, actually, in spite of difficulties that, you focus on having a voice. So where can we find this blog?
Um, so you can f find it on online. It's a Google-based platform.
Okay.
And the direct link to get there is the squeakywheelchairblog.com.
Okay.
I've also been lucky to do some writing projects for some other publications. I've been featured in the Huffington Post a few times. I did a piece for the Women's Media Center,
Awesome.
and I was featured in a poetry anthology on disability and trauma, um, called The Ending Hasn't Happened Yet. It's a print book through the publisher Sable Books. So I've been lucky to have my writing in a few places, and I hope that um, other people, even if their lives are a little different than mine, can find something that they connect to in my story.
Nice. Very nice. I'm sure I have to listen in. So, I know that circles of support are really important to assist anyone in their life, right? In particular, how did you build the right circle of support to assist you in fulfilling your hopes, your dreams, your goals for life? What was that like for you in finding the right people to help and support you?
Um, well, I want to mention first, I think one of the most important things that I've learned through having a disability is that society is too focused on what people do and what they achieve, and that being disabled and not being able to do things exactly like everybody else does them has allowed me to understand that who you are is so much more important than what you do. And at the end of our lives, people are gonna remember who we are, what kind of person we are, how we treated people much more than a pile of accomplishments. But that said, I have been lucky to be able to accomplish many things that were made possible by the advocacy and the activism of people in the generation before me. Um, they really pitched in to push for change that they might not live to see themselves. And that's important to me too, to leave something behind and to believe that outcomes that might not happen in your own lifetime are still worth fighting for because it's making the world better for others. Um, as far as connecting with the people who helped me get where I am now. I mentioned before, a lot of those disability programs like the camp and the dance class, the swimming program, the equestrian program, those spaces that really allowed me to find peace and find purpose in my disability identity were so transformative for me, as well as finding non-disabled people who were willing to interact with me in an authentic way. A lot of times people are nice or polite, but that's not the same as being a true friend or treating someone as a true equal. And as a result, sometimes it takes longer to find non-disabled people that are willing to be friends with me, but that's okay because I've learned that quality is so much more important than quantity, and anyone who's worth your time is going to see you as the whole person that you are, disability um included. Um and they're going to see disability as this multidimensional, very human experience that it is. It's sometimes challenging to talk about the struggles or the grief that can come with disability because a lot of times that's the only narrative that non-disabled people are familiar with. So sometimes there's this fear that if you're honest about your struggles, that they will run with that and think your entire life is a struggle or a misery or sorrow, and it's so not. There are so many pieces of my disability that have made my life more joyful and more meaningful and more purposeful. But at the same time, I don't want people to believe that having a disability is a walk in the park either. It's very much um struggle and also these really amazing, beautiful, irreplaceable experiences all at once. And finding people who really understand me means that they are going to appreciate both sides of the coin because, um, like anything else in life, I think, you know, disability comes with a lot of different feelings that are all true. Um, I read a book recently that I really loved by a disability scholar named Julia Watts Belzer, and she was alluding to the same thing, that one of the hardest things for her to do is to be honest about the fact that sometimes disability has taken things from her or shut her out of things that she's wanted and caused some very real grief because you have this fear that if people hear that truth, they will say, okay, that's the only dimension of this person I'm going to remember. Um, this person's life must be miserable. Everything about being disabled must be terrible and scary and dark, and that's not true either. So, um, that said, it's really, really important to surround yourself with people that are going to listen to your whole experience and not dismiss the value of your life based on one piece of the whole story. In order to see me or anybody with a disability fully, you have to see the struggling and the suffering and the challenges, but you also have to see the joy and the beauty and the wisdom and, frankly, the hilarity because being disabled can also be extremely funny. There's a lot of wonderful niche humor. You gotta see all of that to really see me.
I love that multi-dimensional aspect of seeing people. So as a professional, as a licensed master's level social worker, and you dealing with other professionals, how do they treat you? How do they respond to you?
So that has been, I think, another really challenging aspect of going into social work is many people assume that because folks are in the helping profession, that they're going to be naturally understanding and anti-ableist and non-discriminatory. That's not necessarily true. Unfortunately, I think sometimes the discrimination is worse in the helping professions because social workers, nurses, people in these service professions, they're very used to the disabled person being the client or the person in receipt of help. and they're not necessarily prepared psychologically to see a disabled person as their true equal. And they often sometimes feel intimidated by a disabled person who is stereotypically the receiver of services to know something about the system that they don't. But I would encourage all of those people to check some of their defensiveness and realize that they can learn a lot from someone who has both professional and personal experience in the field. Um, my dreams have had to change shape a bunch of times. I mentioned that I receive long-term care. So something that not a lot of people know is that in order to get in long-term care programs and receive your care at home without going bankrupt, unfortunately, you have to restrict your income most of the time. So as a result of both income restrictions and a general decline in my health that often comes with adulthood and lifelong disability, I have not been able to work in the formal capacity that I once hoped or believed that I would, but I am still able to do meaningful things within the field and to help people um, in many ways that I don't think I would be able to if I was, beholden to an agency. Um, I wish that we lived in a world where people didn't have to choose between their care services and their careers, but that is how things are right now. And I think something positive that has come of that is, again, I've realized that people are not their work, and who we are is so much more important than what we do. And we should try approaching people, who are you? What do you love? Instead of going straight for what do you do? What's your work? What can you produce? Um, that is such a limited view of people. Um, so yeah, it's been hard in many ways finding my way in the field because, like I mentioned, I have not been able to take on a traditional career in the way that a lot of other people have. Um, but I want people to know that even if that is the case for you, if you can't work full time or you can't work in a formal capacity, or maybe your health is fragile, or you need a custom schedule, or you can only volunteer, that's still very valuable. And I don't want anyone to ever feel like they failed because they can't do exactly what non-disabled people are doing. I think that's a trap we fall into sometimes, thinking that inclusion and success always means doing exactly what non-disabled people are doing and doing it in the exact same way. That's not what success and value means to me. Particularly in the last 10 years or so, as I've had some health challenges. Um, I want people to know that if you are taking care of yourself, if you're finding things that you love to do, you're sticking with your values, and you are letting people see who you are, then you have succeeded. Even if it's not in the traditional way, um, because the non-disabled ultra capitalist productivity based view of human value uh, frankly needs to be re-examined. And uh, I I hope that more people will have that realization that when we look back on our lives, um, n nobody is gonna, be thinking about how many hours you worked. It's about who you are and how you treat people, and if you do things that are important to you.
Absolutely. Um, So, looking at society, looking at politics and media, how would you say that people with disabilities are thought of and portrayed today as opposed to 15 years ago? Is it good? Is it not accurate? Do we need more? Do we need less? What are your thoughts about that?
I think in many ways we've moved forward because, like I mentioned, had I been born 20 or even 10 years before I don't think I would have had the opportunity to participate in the public school system. I don't think many of the hard-won rights that were granted to me by those activists in the 70s and 80s, I don't think I would have gotten to enjoy those opportunities had I been born in a different time. So I
Okay,
don't want to
good
make it
point.
seem as if there's been no progress. Of course there has. Um, but I would argue we still haven't made enough progress. I think disability is still very foreign to many people, and there is a part of them that feels some combination of fear and disgust and confusion about disability. And again, I think a lot of that comes from many people's only exposure is through media images, and the media images that we're being offered are still not the best. They're often based in what we talked about before, a single narrative that's usually one of misery, and that's what people take with them. I think part of the reason people with disabilities are still treated poorly in society is because the non-disabled majority has um, held on to this idea that a disabled life is always less, or something terrible like, oh, I could never live that way. I would want to die, or that would be a fate worse than death, which is why I think these media portrayals are really, really important because if people knew that the onset of disability did not mean the end of a quality life, and if we updated our support systems to reflect that so people knew that they would still have belonging and still be cherished if and when they become disabled, I don't think there would be so much stigma around becoming disabled, around interacting with people with disabilities. Um, the political environment, unfortunately, as of late, has been very hostile towards people with disabilities. I think we've slipped back into a space where mm, being openly ableist and bullying people on the basis of disability is back in fashion, which is very disappointing to see. People with disabilities really don't have the luxury of being apolitical because everything we do, and every service we require, every access need we have, it's all political, and our daily lives hang in the balance of these policy decisions. So we need to be engaged, and we need other people to fight for us, especially when so many of these policies have in the past been used to justify eugenics, been used to justify defunding support programs, um, been been used to essentially push us to the outskirts of society. Um, and I know the experience is even more complex for people who are multiply marginalized, so disabled people of color, disabled people who are LGBT, disabled people who are low socioeconomic status. Disability doesn't exist in a vacuum. It interacts with so many other identities. And it's really important that we center the stories of those multiply marginalized people so that um, the the people who are most affected by our policy decisions are are supported and spoken up for when it matters. I think that is especially true right now. Um, and even within the disability community, we definitely need to diversify and give platforms to people from all types of disabilities, all ethnic groups, all religious groups, all sexual orientations, all socioeconomic backgrounds, because disability can't be fairly represented by one voice, and too often still the only voices that are getting out there, even within disability communities, are those of white people. So um it's really important for people with disabilities themselves to seek out other perspectives and to work together. I think different disability groups try to split into factions sometimes and only advocate for their type of disability. We all need to work together and promote cross disability solidarity of sorts, and recognize that certain issues are going to affect certain parts of our community much more, and that there are situations where certain members of our community have privilege and certain don't. And um, we certainly don't want to, create a hierarchy or invalidate anyone's struggles. But that said, we have to be conscious that certain issues um, are are much more complex and frankly much more dangerous for certain groups in our community, especially in this political climate.
You've made some great points, and I think through listening to you, um, it's really clear that disability is a culture with creative possibilities. And that's an amazing thought to have to take with you. Um, you've accomplished a lot in your almost 33 years. And do you see yourself as an advocate for people with disabilities, not on the work side, because you obviously do that through your social work, but do you see yourself also just as an advocate on the social parts of life?
So, yes, I certainly hope that's going to be part of my legacy, because like I mentioned before, it's important to me to keep fighting for other people with disabilities to have a better future and to have more opportunities that I did. And similar to the advocates before me, some of the changes I'm hoping for might not happen in my lifetime, but they're still important to me. Because you have to believe that future generations are worth investing your time and your effort in. Um, it can never be about just yourself advocacy. You have to be focused on the we rather than the me, and hope that even if your desired change doesn't happen tomorrow or doesn't happen while you're still here on Earth, that it will happen someday, and that the people who come after you um, will be able to enjoy whatever it is that you're fighting for. Um, I think, not everybody is an activist or an advocate every day. Certainly some days I just feel like a person. Um, and I think that's important to realize that advocacy looks different for everyone based on what they can give and what their talents are, and that it's not gonna look like chaining yourself to a building for everyone or taking part in a multi-week sit-in or, laying across the doorway in a congressional building. Not everybody can protest in that kind of way, particularly if you have health issues, but everybody can do something. Um, and sometimes just being yourself and living your life with a disability on your terms is its own kind of advocacy, because you are showing people what disability means to you, and hopefully um, diversifying the way people think about disability beyond just that one or two sentences they've maybe seen in a textbook or that little clip they've seen in a TV show. Um, I have this poem that I really like by an activist named Laura Hershey, and she would say often, you get proud by practicing. And I think that's true, that when you have a disability, everyone is going to have moments where they feel really down and really challenged and, facing a lot of struggles, and then other moments where they feel really empowered and proud and excited about what they're doing. So my hope is that everybody will take turns so that um on the days where you're not feeling your proudest or your most empowered or your most energized, other people will stand in with you and fight the fight alongside you, um and then you work your advocacy muscle, and you have other days where you feel really proud and really jazzed and invested in what you're doing. Everybody needs to take turns and support each other so that we always have enough energy to keep going. Um,
Wow,
it's
that is so those are some great words, not just for people with disabilities, but actually for anybody who is struggling with anything, actually. But we are unfortunately out of time. That was a great conversation. Thank you, Kathleen, for sharing your words of wisdom, for sharing your experience, for sharing your knowledge, and for sharing your hope. Uh, Thank you so much for being with us today on this live cast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and I hope everyone has enjoyed our conversation. I've enjoyed being here with all of you. Um, and I hope that if any young people with disabilities are listening to this, they understand that they're very valuable just the way that they are, and that we're human, so we might not be able to do everything or any anything because, we all have limitations in life, so it's not realistic that we'll be able to do absolutely everything, but everyone can do something, and whatever your something is, it's very important.
Thank you so much for those last words. And on that note, we will say goodbye and have a great afternoon. There is a short survey at the end, so please don't hang up just yet.
Thank you so much, Cheryl and Kathleen. That was such a lovely conversation. I appreciate you both for joining us tonight or this afternoon. I did just put up, yeah, our final evaluation poll. So if you do have a moment to answer that, that would be great. And once you're done with that, you can feel free to hop off and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. And thank you, Kathleen. That was
Anytime.
wonderful. That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you. Very inspiring for everyone, not just people with disabilities.
Thank you.
All right, take care. I have to run as well.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.